I'm in Suryagarh right now, actually.
So you're in Suryagarh. Okay. So I was telling them about these series that we call as the Destination Discovery. Rajasthan and the Thar is our volume 2. And the format is very simple for those of you who are listening in. It's going to be, it's always, and we have 3 more volumes to go, and it'll always be on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, usually live chats on Instagram, and 1 or 2 GoToMeeting sessions, depending upon the importance, relevance, and the availability of the person whom we'd like to highlight at that point in time. So I'm going to begin. We are exactly on time. Siddharth, thank you for joining in. So there must be a lot of people like me who are history phobic, and for me history came into prominence only after I entered the travel industry. And the way I remember history is only as travel narratives. And one of the most wonderful narratives for me uh, is the Silk Route narrative. And when Bikaner and Jaisalmer joined the rare community, the wonderful hotels by MRS Hospitality, which is Suryagarh and Narendra Bhawan, that joined the rare community, the idea was to highlight this fantastic 2,000-year-old route that was a trading route, which a friend of mine from the industry told me today, many people believe really turned the world history. So without wasting any time, let's begin by asking the relevance of the Silk Route and what uh, Siddharth, who's been with the MRS Hospitality for over 10 years now, how they ideated around the Silk Route to put up 2 stellar hotels in 2 very important destinations which form a part of the Silk Route. So Siddharth, how did it happen, and how was your research like, and what was the excitement that you felt when you were when you discovered these 2 places and you placed them as one of your signature experiences?
Thank you, Shoba. Thank you for inviting me and having me over. Well, to start, I think I'll start with Jaisalmer first, because a lot of significance lies from there. And of course, Bikaner, which our hotel, which opened much later, we took a lot of influences from there. So when we had set up Jaisalmer, and our mode of hospitality is that we usually offer these offbeat experiences, which have over a period of time become famous and have become very well accepted amongst our demographic. So as we set up the hotel and we started moving out and looking what was there in the city to do, and of course we did not want to go to the fort and all those, because those are things that is very easily available to everybody who's coming in. So we slowly started to discover that there was the remnants of Silk Route that used to pass through Jaisalmer. But what became very interesting was that it wasn't just one place that it passed through, but there was a whole story around it. There was a community of people who were responsible for the route to be successful, and then there was, their houses, their community, the stories of what they did and how they did that. And of course, then there was old relics like an old fort, which stands to date, and it serves as a testament that the Silk Route actually passed through, and this was the Sarai where the tired travelers would take an overnight halt. And the fort itself has a little marketplace which still stands, though now it's been converted to this. It's a collection of old geographic rocks. So there was an old gentleman who had come and had kind of done research on how the rock formations in Jaisalmer predate dinosaurs. So it's now become a little place for all that display. But that used to be the old marketplace where you might not want to, for travelers who were traveling wide distances, are not intending to go down to, say, the south of India, might just come and spend a few days there, trade with other traders, and then return back to their countries. So we discovered a whole, interesting route, and we started working around it. And then as we did more research, we spoke to people who are in history locally. We finally, the Silk Route Trail kind of took shape for us, and now it's become a full day trail. It takes you almost 3 hours before lunch and almost 3 to 4 hours after lunch, if you have to do it in one day, and it gives you a complete
So
lowdown of
are these independent experiences, or can they be collated as one singular Silk Route experience? How does that work?
No, so this is a one single Silk Route experience. For the ease of our guests, what we've done is we've broken it down to smaller experience, also a Thar trail. So for anybody who doesn't want to spend a whole day, can choose to do a 2-3 hour shorter version of it. But ideally, it's one single experience that one does, spread over a number of hours, depending on how you want to, do it.
Fantastic. So should we talk about two signature experiences that we do? And one of my favorite, of course, is the Kuldhara experience. So would you like to would you like to take the audience through that?
Sure. So what had happened in Jaisalmer is that they had Silk Route pass through many years back, but then the traders were attacked on the route by local marauders, and then this discouraged them to start avoiding Jaisalmer in a lot of ways. But people who were traversing through the Pamirs found it very difficult to do that, because it was, traveling through the mountains always meant loss of life, loss of cattle, loss of goods. So they started avoiding that route, and the only route then remained was, of course, that you had to come in Jaisalmer. But at the same time, interestingly, there was a community of people who had shifted into Jaisalmer called the Palivals. That set up. They were, I think, based around the now extinct river Saraswati, and they were always on the banks around them. And it's always interesting how civilizations move with water. So when they set up their towns, they realized that the only way to make money, of course, was to be able to bring the route back. I mean, money could be goods or whatever. And then they spoke to these marauders, and they said, instead of attacking these routes, why don't we let them pass? We'll tax them, let the trade flourish, and we will give you a cut of whatever. They came to a certain agreement. And so the Silk Route Trail came back into Jaisalmer and passed through these different places. So of course, the Kaaba Fort became a central point where was always a sarai for an evening stopover. And then the Palivals set up different. Palivals had about 86. I won't call them villages, but little towns, which are between India and Pakistan, of course. Between Jaisalmer and the Pakistan side. In Jaisalmer, there are two such villages. One is, of course, Kuldhara, which you mentioned is one of your favorites. So this is a beautiful old town. Of course, was emptied out overnight, but the roofs have all caved in. But one can easily see how the houses were laid out and how everything took place. Now, each of these, of course, these towns always had a little area where all the cenotaphs are built. This is for the remembrance of the people. And what is very interesting in those cenotaphs, because these cenotaphs always had those, little drawings that are drawn in them of the people who had passed on, inscriptions, and so on and so forth. So some of them have inspirations from Egypt and also Asian, as in Chinese and that part of the world. So it becomes very interesting that how cultures affected, just to say, architecture
through the trade,
at that point in time.
Architecture,
through the trade at that point of time.
Yeah. So the story of Kuldhara is that they suddenly upped and left, right? That's the ongoing story. So that's what you see, and that's the whole mystery of that place. And I don't know if you still do the Chudel walk, which I just love the sound of it. Yes, the Chudel walk. But I also read that the Kuldhara, the Palivals had they basically, they were kind of very attached to water. I mean, they revered water,
Yeah,
and that's what I mean. They
absolutely.
actually revered
Absolutely.
water, and they had a very, very sophisticated water management system, which can still be
Yeah,
seen today.
yeah, absolutely.
Right,
So this
and
is when they came.
yeah, go ahead.
So this is basically when they had moved into Jaisalmer, they realized that uh, it was in a way a dry country. There wasn't much rainfall. But Jaisalmer was, for millions of years under the ocean. So the landscape is just mostly all troughs. There are no plateaus or mountains that you see. There are also the only sand dunes start a little away from the Thar. So the land is mostly all volcanic. And the soil is bentonite, which doesn't let the water kind of go down into the water table. So what they did was they took these large pieces of land, which were shaped like a trough, and they dug them further. So whenever even a scanty rainfall, the water would collect, the water would flow down from around and kind of collect in these little troughs and stay there. These were called kadims. And when the water would flow down, it would always bring a little bit of soil, it would bring nutrients, and it would just stay there. And then that's where they would start farming. So when you travel, and
Farming,
this,
yeah, yes.
the system still persists. It still exists. And as you travel into Jaisalmer, you go out, you still see these large kadims, which are ready to receive rainfall whenever it is. And they're absolutely farmed, they're green. It's almost like coming into an oasis in the midst of a desert.
Oh, fantastic. Are there still some of the oases around the deserts of Thar, Siddharth? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. So the people of Jaisalmer still use that agriculture system. It hasn't changed because there is no water that has come into the city. I mean, finding water in Jaisalmer is like finding gold. People who find fresh water here actually
Yes.
start selling it. So if you, that's the only way to farm,
Yeah.
is to be able to just have these large. And what happens with villages is that they would all collaborate and they would track this large piece of land. And once the rain comes, and it's beautiful during monsoons. Once you drive out, you just see these swaths of lakes. It's almost like a lake country for those 10-14 days, filled with water to the brim for kilometers around. And then all these village people who've taken, say, for example, this large piece of land, once the water starts settling down, they kind of divide that land amongst themselves and start farming there. And that is still practiced to date.
Yes. I remember one of the pit stops we made was at a little village where they had sweet water. And, they kind of literally pulled, sweet water from the well, and we tasted it. And and very proudly, they're proud owners of the sweet water well.
Yeah.
So let's, what is the other experience in Suryagarh that kind of, harks back to the Silk Route, the Silk Route and the trading?
So what we do is in the morning, for example, so if you have to, if a guest has given us a complete day of his, we take you out to the Kaaba Fort, which was the main fort on the trading route, and we start you off with something called a breakfast with peacocks. The little, we call it a fort, but it's actually very small, and it has a little temple there, and the priest kind of throws dana to all these peacocks in the morning. So you're sitting on the top of the fort, and there are these like 500 to 600 peacocks just kind of swooping in to eat, and it is just beautiful. Of course, the fort is on a little bit of a height, so down as you are sitting and looking the eye of sight, you see this large village, which is another Paliwal settlement, or was another Paliwal settlement, with, of course, the roofs caved in, the roads which still stand for 700 years, the little empty temple with inscriptions written in old Sanskrit still stand as is. And just behind that village is a large kadim, is where the farming takes place. So it's beautiful with large. Yeah, so it's beautiful with large trees and lovely. It has this lovely cape there. So it becomes interesting in the morning for a lot of our guests as they're having their eggs or parathas, to be able to look over this just where this old civilization existed, and have a look at these beautiful peacocks. So that is, of course, the start. And then we take you out to the cenotaphs. We also take you to places, for example, where the sati used to take place. So it's almost, we're tracing back the life of Palewals. We start with their main hub, then we go and show you how their farming used to happen. Then we take you
the marketplace,
how they were, the marketplaces. Then we take you out to how they were cremated, and what are the old remembrance that was built for them, and then so on and so forth. The trail continues, and then there's a beautiful temple that is also included in the trail, and it ends in the evening at Kuldhara, just behind Kuldhara actually. We set up a beautiful dinner. Again, it's a lovely piece of land. There is just nothing around. You have the old village on one side, and you just have a beautiful setting of just one
sundowner
singer sitting. Yeah.
The sundowner, yeah, fantastic. So let's go back to Suryagarh as a property, and the inspirations that you derived from the Silk Route to curate the hotel, for instance. What are some of the features that you do? I know each of your hotel is a palette of stories. I mean, that's one of the most beautiful things. I mean, I am always I just kind of walk around, trying to visualize the amount of storytelling that is behind every collection or a fabric or an installation at both these places. So what are the inspirations that you have taken from the Silk Route into Suryagarh?
Well, multiple. First was, of course, the structure itself. The idea was that we were very influenced by the architecture locally of the Paliwals. So, for example, if you look at the way the villas of the Havelis, as we call them, are built, they're built on the idea of the interlocking architecture. So earlier, of course, you did not have the, all the cement and etc., the means of construction that we have today. So people would use these large stones, and they would kind of fit in small stones between those large stones to interlock them. And that structure would withstand anything. Yeah. So the Havelis are built on that premise, and all our Havelis, actually, we've used exactly the same technique in being able to build them. The second influence, of course, comes in for food. We have a Rajasthani specialty restaurant called Legends of Marwar. And the idea is that it's not a Rajasthani food, but it is the food of the Bhatiyars. Now, the Bhatiyars were brought in by the Persians as their khansamas or the innkeepers, because Persians like their food in a certain style. And their style of cooking is what inspired the menu for this particular restaurant. For example, if it is the Patthar Kuta Gosht, where the meat gets pounded in the stone for about 6 to 8 hours, so that doesn't lose the proteins, the viscosity, but kind of still becomes threadbare. Or to the ways the other kebabs are done, or the way the curries are done, or kind of takes influence. That the idea is that the spice should underline the dish and not take over, which was the Persian style of cooking in a lot of ways.
Fantastic. So I'm also aware that the route that gets into Jaisalmer, that takes you through Jaisalmer and the other parts of Rajasthan, Nagaur, Bikaner, Shekhawati, is actually a feeder route that actually fed to the main trunk route, right? In that sense, this part, the Rajasthan part of the Silk Route, is actually only 400 years of the 2,000-year history of the original trade route, right? So, would it be right to say that the Silk Route is just a metaphor for there were other things that people traded and took around with them from one place to the other? And what would the other things be like?
So a lot of, for example, a lot of gold and silver was also traded at that point of time. When it came to fabrics, pattu, the pattu weave is something that's very famous of here, especially towards the Barmer region, and was traded quite freely. And then, of course, you always found, because of the wealthy tradesmen who resided in these cities, Bikaner, Jaisalmer, so on and so forth, they had a liking for how to say this, but very kind of expensive or beautiful fabric. So you'll also find a lot of silk, lovely silk that was used at that point of time. If you go to the fort of Bikaner, for example, you'll see some lovely fabrics that have been used to kind of do up, the thrones, etc., etc. Sorry. So this becomes that became very interesting. How it was both ways. It wasn't just the local produce from here, but it was also the beauty that was brought in from around the world and kind of used in
from around
to create
the world.
this on.
Yeah. So it would be right to presume that there would have been a lot of trade in cattle and and horses and things like that.
Absolutely.
That's how.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, so the famous cattle fair, which happens in Rajasthan, where so Jaisalmer has a beautiful fair, and of course Nagaur has one. So these were all part of. Then these fairs have been going on for ages. Of course, they become interesting from that perspective.
Yeah, I also read somewhere that the Arabian horses, that those are also a part of the trading commodities.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so okay. The next stop is Bikaner, and how much time does it take now from Jaisalmer to Bikaner?
Oh, 4 hours flat. The road's been absolutely redone. It's a beautiful route now. So just 4 hours flat.
It's fantastic. Yeah. So I wonder how a caravan between Bikaner from Jaisalmer to Bikaner would look like. So let's again, another beautiful place, and I'm so glad that it came back into the tourism, into travel itineraries since the inception of better after the inception of the flights that started here. And of course, having a hotel like yours, like Narendra Bhawan, and also Jaisalmer, having that kind of very, very high-end experience really meant that people have started looking at Bikaner very favorably. At one point in time, I knew that Bikaner was a part of a lot of heritage itineraries, especially from France. Right.
Yeah.
So we are here in Bikaner now, and I see Narendra Bhawan on the screen. So how did Bikaner excel itself on this route? I know it had a very powerful place. We had a great guide who took us around, and he explained how Bikaner became very, very prominent on the trade route. Right. So how did that happen?
So Bikaner has an interesting history in terms that how it was set up. So it's only was set up, I think, in the 1477s. I might be wrong by 10, 20 years, but this is about 800 years back. The idea was that the king of Jodhpur, the son, who did not get the throne, had traveled to Bikaner with his little contingent, and was met there by, well, not Bikaner then, but it was called Bangladesh. I think it was a bit of a wild country, and he was met there by the Jat community called the Nairs. And he proposed that either we come to a truce and you accept me as your ruler, or we fight. So they were very forthcoming and said, absolutely fine with it. And so he named the town after himself, Rao Bika, and of course Nairs, Bikaner, so after the Jat community there. And he set up, because he was a poor king, he did not have a lot of money when he had moved, and he just reached there. So he made a beautiful, very small little fort there. It's called Bikaji Ki Tekri. It's not on the tourist map, and usually the place is kept locked, and one has to be able to call for it to be open. But
to be open,
if you go inside, once you go in and look at it, it's quite stunning to see this small little fort built by this king who probably didn't have much resources at that point of time. But once that was done, and slowly, I think the first few years of Bikaner were in a bit of obscurity because not much was going on until the kings found the traders. This is when the king offered these traders that you come and set up your houses here for 1 anna. I think the land was given for 1 anna in the center of the city, and all your trades should pass through Bikaner. Also, you should be trading here. So there's a place called Suratgarh, which is I think about 150 odd kilometers from the Bikaner city. So Surat Singh was the king, and he made this place, and he said, "You trade in Suratgarh, I'll provide you protection." So it's almost like a special economic zone. So these guys set up shop there. They would trade there, and they made these extremely beautiful houses, which are all these famous havelis. And the architects were brought in from London, from all over the world to be. And you see the influence. You see the Mughal influences. You see the British influences on these houses, because they had to be just extraordinary in a lot of ways, and it defined how wealthy you were by how beautifully carved your house is.
House was, yeah. It's I always talk about the common man's architecture. I mean, usually when you talk about buildings in India, as it's always forts and palaces, but there's a genre of architecture which is built by the common man and the merchants' homes, especially along this route, Jaisalmer, Bikaner, and things like that. It's basically for them to. Where else would you splurge your money those days, right? So you kind of build beautiful houses, and fantastic.
It's very interesting. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was asking you a question only. Go ahead. I'm listening to you.
I was just because you mentioned how they built the house, something came to my head. I thought share it. So when you go to see these houses, you realize that there wasn't much space. So it's like any old city. These are houses kind of built in a limited space. So they found this form of architecture, which is that you would start your base small and then keep growing the house as it goes.
Widen
it out as. So some of the houses, which, well, if you even look at in the picture at the Patamoki Haveli, which doesn't look large at all, have entertainment halls, which are, I'm told, I haven't seen them personally, but I'm told are about 125 feet in length. And it just is bewildering how they fit that, those structures in that little space. And then just so
that little space,
from the outside, you have this little house, but you go inside and it's almost like a little palace of its own.
That little palaces, I mean, amazing. So let's look at, you were talking about how prosperous Bikaner was at one point in time. And of course, it owed this to the trading that was done, which, became a big trading hub. So I told you, when I was taken to the fort, to the Junagadh fort, it was actually pictorially shown what were the key elements that were probably Bikaner was one of the first to receive one of the like railways, for instance. So these were some of the key areas where the development for development purposes, Bikaner became a key point.
Yeah. So, well, the idea was that Ganga Singh Ji, who was the ruler of Bikaner, was a very interesting man. Of course, he was the representative of all the kings, of the 600 kings of India to the British government. But he was also an intelligent individual. He wanted to do things for his community of people. So through his friendships with the kings and with the British government, he kind of worked out a system where he was able to get, or through his friendship with the kings of Punjab, he was able to get the water in. So initially, the Indira Gandhi Canal, for example, was called the Gang Canal. And from the British, he got the railways, and that the water brought in the electricity. So all these three elements, the electricity, water, and the railways, were in a lot of ways, Bikaner owes it to Ganga Singh Ji, and that is beautifully depicted in one of the towers in the fort, and it's drawn, and you can see it from far across. It's drawn like 3 strips, and it's a commemoration of his hard work, of course, that he did for his community.
Yeah, so the first to get railways, I guess, right? And the
first
canal.
To get railways, water,
and of course, the third is, of course, to get electricity, right? It is water and electricity. Yeah. You have your own. Bikaner has its own little aircraft as well,
which was gifted to Ganga Singh Ji, absolutely, for his efforts during, I think, World War I. He sent all his Camel Corps battalion, put the camels in the ships, and send them in the Middle East to fight for the world, of course, the Allies. And the Royal Air Force was so impressed that they gifted him the first I think it's a fighter aircraft, which is still kept in the fort and in the museum.
Yeah. So let's look at some of the sites in Bikaner. I've actually never done the Old City Walk, which apparently is fabulous. Right. So is that Old City Walk much like Jaisalmer? Does it have the same, like the old merchant building, the Havelis and things like that? And
so Bikaner is a bit larger than Jaisalmer in that terms, because also it's a little recent. Jaisalmer, of course, the Palivals kind of came around the 12th, 13th, 14th century, and so it came and it kind of faded over a period of time. Bikaner kind of stayed and it grew, and it almost the 1900s was one of the most prosperous towns, the wealthiest towns in the country. So if you, for example, if you were to travel through the old city, it's cleanly laid out. Of course, there is the main fort, and then there is a separate area where all the old Havelis are, all the old houses of these famous merchants are. So you can, so we have different trails actually there as well. So we do something called a merchant trail, where we take you through these
that's the trailers,
denoted to a famous family. So there's the Golshahs, there is the Daddas, Dagas, and each one has a story. There was one trader, for example, who Ganga Singh Ji was in need of some money. So this gentleman overnight had sent some crazy amount of, I don't even remember the number, but crazy amount of gold, just in large thals, to the king, that here you go. And in return, he was gifted gold sandals, which was the sign of the highest citizenship at that point of time. So on and so forth. So we take you through all these walks, we tell you these little stories, and then we take you to the spice market, which is, I think, a beautiful market, because old spices are still traded in the raw form, which is now, probably you will see it in Delhi if you go to the old Delhi side.
Khari Bauli, yeah,
to Nuri or whatever. So it's just that format of.
Siddharth, we've lost you.
Trading
so
still exists,
probably would.
And then of course there is a so Bikaner had the Sarai.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, it's better now. We kind of you. Can
you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, but we can hear you, but you're fuzzing over. You want to that's better. It's better. Can you hear me now?
It's better.
We can't hear you.
I can very well.
Yeah, okay, we can hear you. Yeah.
Let me log in.
Yeah, log in again, Siddharth. I think that'll be helpful. It'll also be helpful if you connect it to the 4G if you have. Wi-Fi gets a little tricky at this point in time.
I'll do that. Just 1 second.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining in. We'll just wait for a second when Siddharth joins back again. I think this is the time when most people do their webinars. We usually face problems with net connectivity. Any questions you have, kindly post on this thing, because in the next 10-15 minutes, we'll start questions. We'll start taking questions. This is the one that's on the screen that you see. That's Narendra Bhawan, and shortly we'll talk about So this group of hotels, their first hotel was Suryagad, just outside Jaisalmer, and the second one is Narendra Bhawan in Bikaner, which is of course both of them ideally a part of the. There's Siddharth, yeah, both of them ideally a part of the Silk Route, and which is why we call this session as Retracing the Silk Route. There's Siddharth again. Siddharth, so we were talking about the walks in the walled city of Bikaner.
Yeah. So can you hear me now properly?
Yes, very clear. Yeah.
So one is of course the merchant trail that we do, and I was telling you how we take you through these Havelis, we take you through the spice market, and then the old market, the Katla of Bikaner, as they call it, was the old Sarai. So of course there are no vehicles that go in. It's that little, it's like Jaipur, those really small gullies, and you're going through just shop and shop and shop of fabrics, silk, sarees, just a lot of fabrics for that example. But that used to be the sarai where also the Silk Route traders would come and stop over, of course, and a lot of trade took place, and it still stands as is. Of course, now it's been converted to this, in a way, a rudimentary shopping mall, one has to say that.
Marketplace, yeah.
Marketplace in a lot of ways. But it's an interesting walk because it gives you how the trade in in Bikaner took place and what were the interesting points that kind of highlighted it. And what's very interesting is that because it's a recent history, this is the 1700s, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of things are still as is and haven't changed over time. Of course, Bikaner is also a small city, so that helps.
Yeah, also, most of these places are great photo opportunities for people who, I mean, in a rapidly, in the rapidly growing urbanization around even cities like Jaipur. I think these small pockets like, Nagaur, Bikaner, these little towns where you can still take some very authentic pictures, of course, a mobile phone here and there notwithstanding. I guess the imagery it makes is very significant. So, one of the interesting things as I was researching, I discovered was there was not only of course the Silk Route flowed from China to right up to Syria, right, via Turkey, Central Asia. India was also, because they wanted to circumvent the Pamir route. What were the things from around Bikaner and Jaisalmer that kind of contributed to the trade?
I think the biggest attraction for these places were the traders. Now, interestingly, in Rajasthan, the community of traders don't belong to a certain place. They always moved around. Wherever they moved, they took the trade with them. That's why for every king, it was the most prized possession. It's like, you build a special economic zone and have like Google and Facebook and all kind of come in and build their offices there because this is these things will bring in money. So the traders would always bring in money because they would move the trade with them. So that was because they would provide you safe passages. They knew how and what was being traded at that point of time, and they would also help all these people who were coming because the information flow was so weak at that point of time. I mean, a lot of these, if somebody's coming from Persia, wouldn't know exactly. This is just stories that one has
what
heard.
they're to be expected. Yes,
what to expect.
It must be like Tom going about where to go. Yeah.
Exactly. For example, I mean, I don't know, there's a famous story of the Roman Empire and how the Roman Empire had sent an emissary to India, of course, and they didn't hear back from them for a long period of time. And then somebody kind of realized that we should go back and reconnaissance. And when they did, they found that this whole contingent was just kind of having fun and enjoying themselves and, just collecting silk in India and, just drinking up. And so it's interesting how people would come. But these traders were the linchpin between all of this kind of happening, be it Jaisalmer, Bikaner, or other places within Rajasthan.
Fantastic. Yeah. So let's now go back to Narendra Bhawan as a concept. I know that the whole property, and you see from the picture there that it is set in a residential community. Yeah. And one of the first things when you showed me around, you told me that because there is nothing much for people to look out to, you made Narendra Bhawan very inward looking. That was the idea. And I mean, as you walk through the floors and as you walk through the lobby, the open spaces, verandas, there is so much to look inside, right? So how did you conceptualize this? I mean, believe me, Siddharth, it's very fascinating for me. And, there are two kinds of hotels. Hotels that, of course, define a destination. And there are hotels that the destination defines them, and you're one of the later. So how you've used the destination to define the kind of hotel that you have made here?
Well, this was a bit of a difficult project for us when it came to because so this was, of course, the house of the last king of Bikaner, and when we, as a operating team, took over the building, well, the building didn't exist as is. It was, of course, Narendra Singh ji lived there. It was I think, a ground plus one story, old French bungalows, pink in color, large windows. He lived there with about 400 cows and 100 dogs.
Wow.
All the cows were around so there were beautiful stables around the house. He had taken out his single Italian stone cut tubs for them to drink water out of. There were air conditioning. And the dogs were all, they were Saint Bernard. So they were very, all kinds of species there. So when we took off as an operating team, we took over the building, which was now constructed. The idea was that we wanted to build something which resonated with either that place or the personality, and the personality spoke to us the most. So hence Narendra Bhawan was in a way conceptualized, depicting a life of the king, of course mostly real but some imagined, and just kind of taking all those memory and screwing them around in different ways. So it became very interesting how we would do the design, because the design would have to be of that era. So for example, Art Deco came into picture. The food had to be a bit anglicized. So we didn't do the dal bati churma and the lal mas generally, but just brought in a little more flavor or a bit of change to it, with fish and chips and pork bellies, etc. So similarly, just everything took that shape, took that king's life
Shape, yeah.
And how a global bon vivant king of the 1960s and 70s would live. How he would host parties became what Narendra Bhawan is in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the rooms and how you conceptualize the rooms, which I think is another story in itself. And I know very loosely, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so the rooms were just, again, going back. So we kept going back to the king's life. So the rooms are basically broken down into 4 categories. The one that showing right now is called the Prince Rooms. And this is how we imagined the king would have designed rooms when he was a teenager. So you'd see velvet in there. There are glass. There is crystals. There is just interesting English prints on the bed. The color of the walls is a bit of pink, and it's not the usual dull off-white that you see. So these became a teenager prince's staying quarters in a lot of ways. After that is something called regimental rooms, which are, of course, all kings or princes at that point of time would have to go to the Royal Military Academy, because that's where you were trained in the arts of warfare, strategy. They trained you to be how to rule. So in a way, you became an army man in a lot of ways. And the regimental room kind of takes from the idea. Well, this is the base room category, the residence rooms. So the regimental rooms take from the idea that it's an army man's quarters, and that's how they came into being. So the colors, the way the art was done, the little trophies in the room kind of all talk about the regimental order. After that is something called the India room. The idea.
Sorry.
The idea behind the.
It's a Zoom bomb. Yeah, sorry.
The idea behind the India rooms is just that it was the rooms are designed to kind of depict India and independence, and one of the things that depicts that is the color indigo. So of course the walls are done in an indigo format. But it's more beige, it's more white, it's more quiet. There is a little charkha of the Gadiji on the side. We put spools of khadi on the wall. But as you're growing higher in the category, the design element comes down, becomes quieter. And the last category is, of course, called the Republic Suite. The Republic Suite is ode to India when India was kind of shedding its old image of being under the British and kind of coming into its own. So it's a lot of ways it's setting up of Chandigarh, for example. And it's the room is an ode to an architect, especially Le Corbusier. and how and not him, but how an architect's room has to look like. So it's more straight furniture and not so much of design, but the gray walls, the black kind of shades, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, fantastic. And you added 2 more floors to it, right? When you actually took the property over for.
No, we built actually around it. So we kept the old structure as is, and we built around and over the old structure. So actually the first floor of the old structure still exists and is part of the property. The ground floor, of course, has been totally now redone with, of course, the new construction. Yeah. So it has a little office, the restaurants and all that is on the ground floor itself.
Absolutely. And I know that the spa at Narendra Bhawan is very special, right? It's called the Clinic, and the spa, and it's on the top floor. And there's also a wonderful swimming pool that overlooks the town, which yes. So what's the idea behind Clinic? Because I know in Jaisalmer you have the Wraith, which is inspired by the desert.
Yeah. So the idea behind Clinic was that we wanted to, of course, not get into the basic Ayurveda, which I think is over and done with in a lot of ways. We wanted to build a spa that, of course, was in sync with the hotel. So it had to be, we thought that it had to be a bit of a European sanatorium. That was, of course, the design, and that is why the tapestries and the color. The spa, of course, Clinic, because it's a serious spa, and it's a very different spa in a lot of ways. We're the only beamer spa in India. It's technology that's now used by NASA, where this is a bed which kind of passes very minute electromagnetic signals, and it works on a cellular level for your capillaries to carry more oxygen. So your body's healing is fantastic. Like, just 2-3 sessions on it. Yeah. Even if you have aches and pains like joint pains, etc., it's shown marked results. So that becomes an essential part of our spa. So all the, when you're getting a spa treatment, you're lying on the bed, which is a beamer bed. The second, of course, is we work with the Dr. Bach flower therapies. This was a German doctor in the 90s.
Yeah, so I love the idea of the Bach therapy. Absolutely. Yes.
So you get to drink it, and it's also mixed in your oil. So it's kind of beneficial both ways. And of course, the third one is we use the top 3 most, I won't say expensive, but the most precious oils, hemp, baobab, and primrose. And those are the oils that we do for your spa, for your treatments. And the treatment themselves are a bit different. We even mention it as a byline in the spa menu that this is not, of course, we do the usual, the usual deep tissue massages, etc. But these 2-3 treatments are a bit off the cuff. One is called the emotional release, and one is called the physical regeneration. The emotional release is we work with your marma points, and physical regeneration is where they need you with these, kind of brass things. And both of them work very differently. One is just for your emotional emotional make-being, and the other one, of course, is more to do with your physical and your body and etc.
Fantastic. One more thing I'd like to touch upon is the experiences around food that you have created around in Narendra Bhawan, right?
Yeah.
Siddharth, hoteliering, I think, is a very interesting and a very, very creative, enterprise. And especially in our, among the rare community, because not everybody comes from a hospitality background. It is completely, it's genius, right? They're like, it's literally created from their ideas and the innovations that they brought about. And I've always been fascinated with the food stories at a lot of the hotels on Rare, and yours especially, Narendra Bhawan. And this is the first time I heard something like the literary lunch. Can you explain the literary lunch to people who are looking at? One of the key things about the literary lunch is that it involves and engages every person at the table. And if you're a family, you literally have to put your mobile phone and your iPads at the side, because otherwise you're not engaged at all, and you're being asked questions while you're you're eating. I mean, very gently, of course. Yeah, the literary lunch, Siddharth.
So the idea, of course, the idea came once we had set up everything was to what to do with the food experiences. And again, we went back to the same story of the king. And now we had to imagine this king in the 1960s and 70s, this guy who's unmarried but has traveled the world. How would he throw parties? I mean, and this was in a lot of ways the age of intellectuals. This was the Albert Camus and the Oscar Wildes of the world. So the idea came to be so that we wanted to take 7 literary classics from his age, which were, so for example, be it the Ulysses, or be it the Lighthouse. So these were books that were famous during that point of time, and from each book we took an excerpt, which was which translates into a dish. So the idea is that one reads the excerpt from the book, and then the dish is kind of served to you. Of course, the dish itself, for example, we did the book The Bell Jar, and the excerpt from that is of how the protagonist is slowly descending into madness. So of course, the dish that comes to you is a little bell jar with cheese and kind of a Melba toast on the side, and a bit of smoke to give it theater. But yes, so every book kind of follows a dish which follows the interpretation of that excerpt itself, and then one has to be able to read it, so it engages you because you're reading the whole excerpt, and then the dish is being served to you, and we invite our guests to kind of do that themselves.
Yes, and the most important part is you take your time with it. So it's a very slow meal, and I remember sitting around there, and we almost ate for about 2 hours. It's a 2-hour session. The other, of course, this is on the other end. I mean, it's really subtle. It's it's a luxury. It's at the same time very, very experiential. On the other hand, we have you serve a complete Bikaner wala platter, So the street food of Bikaner, which is very, very famous as Bikaner wala, Bikano, and all these brands around. So that itself is another platter, and it's another experience, a little robust, like really, fills your senses, and you have to concentrate, and you want to eat more, that kind of a thing. So yeah, go ahead and tell me about the Bikaner wala experience.
That is very interesting, because so we do this dinner. It's called the museum dinner, and the idea actually came from, we'd actually gone to see one of them. Bikaner has beautiful museums. They're very well preserved and they're very well kept. Very surprising.
Yeah.
So one of the museums, we found this menu, which was called which was a French menu, which was served in the 1927 banquet, which Ganga Singh Ji hosted. And of course, it's got the all French dishes. It's got potage, it's got pomfret, etc. There was one thing called the Pladu Bikaner, which was the plate of Bikaner, which we didn't understand what it was. So we actually called on
oh wow, yes.
So we actually called on the royal family and spoke to Siddhi Baisa that, so she didn't know. So she had to ask her grandmother that what was it, because it doesn't make sense to have in a French menu this Pladu Bikaner, which
the Pladu Bikaner, yeah.
Yeah, what the heck is it? So what it was actually was, as you're getting served food, and this is just that French style of serving where the guy comes with your fish and you kind of, taking your own fish, you get this large platter which has the specialities of Bikaner. So there is kachori, there is
Bikaner, little,
like lal mas, all of it.
I love that.
And it was
I
just
love the
Pladu
Bikaner.
One person here, and you took whatever you wanted to,
You wanted. Fantastic. So we are almost running out of time, and I do want to take those questions a few people have put out here. Quickly, I wanted to touch upon the Lakshmi Niwas Palace and what I know it's a spectacular palace, and the last time I saw it, we were having some. You were having the suites renovated, right? And so where are we going with that, and how does that become a part of the Narendra Bhawan experience, or is it a separate entity?
So what we've done in Lakshmi Niwas is that it was initially run as a very large 15-room hotel, but we soon discovered that a lot of rooms were built after. It was initially supposed to be just a 12-bedroom guest house for Ganga Singh Ji, because he found his own house was not as beautiful, and he was hosting all these dignitaries of the world. All the kings were coming to him. So he built this lovely palace, which also had his office just in front of his house, the Dalgarh, or next to the house. And each bedroom was denoted by, so there is a Mountbatten suite, there is the Kapurthala room, so on and so forth. So what we've done a year and a half back was we brought the hotel back to its originality. So we cleaned out, we stopped selling all these 150 whatever rooms that we were selling, and we brought down it to a 8 all-suite hotel. And then we've started to slowly offer, for example, your museum dinner takes place in the Gold Room in Lakshmi Nivas, which is absolutely fantastic. And then you've been
fantastic,
there.
yes.
And similarly, the gardens now we do the Darbar of Bikaner, so we do a proper Rajasthani meal with an entertainment. Sit down. Sit down. And then, of course, plans are being now, we're working with a restoration architect out of Mumbai who's just done some plans for the hotel. And as and when things improve now, we'll start working on renovating it back and selling it back.
Fantastic. Quickly, Siddharth, some of the crafts of Bikaner, right? So I know the Leheria, there's a batik or tie and dye enterprise in Bikaner, which is very popular, and also the camel fabrics. I mean, the fabrics made of camel wool, right?
So yeah, so camel fabrics, of course, over a period of time, they've kind of garnered their own, and then there are a lot of people who do these. There is also the carpets, so which was started by Ganga Singh Ji, where he wanted his prisoners to be able to have work. So they started to weave carpets, and of course they use gold thread, so on and so forth. So these was called the Bikaner jail carpets, which are, of course, if one finds now, is worth a fortune. And then this industry, this carpet industry, and of course the camel wool just kind of took the whole thing forward, and Bikaner has now become this large hub for almost all of carpet manufacturing that happens in a lot of places. I mean, I know people who are supplying to IKEA, so on and so forth. Then there's also the lovely the jewelry work that happens.
Yes, in Bikaner, yeah.
The kind of meenakari work that happens, which is the signature of Bikaner.
Very special to Bikaner. Yes, yes. And when I went shopping, they would talk about Robert Cavalli, who comes and he sources some of the fabric from there and things. I mean, these guys are throwing names at you. So quickly, are you ready for some questions, Siddharth? We have a few people writing in something. Yeah. So we have Jean from Lux Travels Australia, who wrote in saying that Glam Girls had an amazing velvet waistcoat tailored here. Mine is a navy trimmed with silk. Just fabulous. That's from Jean. Not really a question, but Jean is always on, she follows us on a lot of our webinars, and she's been a great support, which is wonderful. And then we have Amar Grover from UK. We have Amar Grover from UK saying, I stayed in Narendra, he's a journalist, by the way, you might remember him, that very tall gentleman. I stayed in Narendra Bhawan a few years back and interviewed the head designer, Ayush Kasliwal. He actually interviewed Ayush, who was largely responsible for the property's distinct look and feel. The front lobby and porch are sensational. Yeah. So can you ask Siddharth where his friend GM from Suryagarh has gone? I heard to Udaipur. Yes, Jean, I know who you're talking about, and I'll send you the information on that. So there's another question. So Suryagarh Jaisalmer holds an overnight desert safari experience for their guests too, or only sunset sand dune experience with the folklore show?
So yeah, we do the dune dinners. We don't do an overnight safari experience, but we do the Chudel Trek, which is the part of the Silk Route Trail also, and that starts usually like close to midnight. So it's an hour-long trail where we take you to these different spots and tell you interesting stories. And getting scared is, of course, your prerogative.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't scared actually. I think that night of the wedding. So I'd like to end, but not before talking about one of the, I think, most beautiful I won't say it was an export from the Silk Route. I think one of the byproducts of the original route was Sufism that came into this area. And I think the Sufi festival at Nagaur is testimony to that. You have a wonderful team of Manganyas who sing for you. Suryagar at 6, for those who are interested, is on Instagram, and you can hear them every evening. So tell us about the Manganya experiences. And I'm telling you, it was one of my favorite moments in the evening when, you know, they actually go, he looks for a place on the top of the hillock, test the wind so that the music flows in the right direction and you get it right in your ears. And I think the whole the work around the final you know, the music is what makes it very, very special. Yeah. So are they with you? Are they back with you? Are they in Suryagarh now? What's happening to the Mehboob Khan, right? Mehboob Khan.
Mehboob Khan, yeah. Mehboob and his party among
he's on.
Well, they'll be coming back. They'll be coming back in
he's
a
on
few days.
Facebook, by the
Yes.
Yeah, he's on Facebook, by the way.
Yes,
I find it very cute. Yes, yeah. So go ahead, tell us about Mehboob Khan and his family. And
So, yeah, well, it was interesting. The music, of course, one can't ever leave it out of a hotel. So when we were doing music in Jaisalmer, for example, we came to realize that the Mangnyas, of course, were responsible for a lot of folk music that came into Rajasthan. These guys were a byproduct of the Silk Route because they came in from Persia. One really can't trace back the lineage, but well, some say it's the gypsies, whatever it is. But they came from that side of the tower, from Pakistan side of the world, and they don't use any electronic equipment to, you know, for their singing. Of course, now it's
for music.
So famous, so yeah, they now travel all over the world and do shows, etc. But essentially, their voice is supposed to be so raw and guttural that you don't particularly need to put any kind of electronic equipment to amplify it. And these guys have been, once they would come and do little shows, go back, and slowly the kings, they really found a lot of love in the courts. So these kings would give them, you know, little places to live. They would set them up, and a lot of these families then never left. And these families, I mean, so the training in the families was always within the family. So the father is singing, the cousins are singing, the sons are singing,
yeah.
you know, the ladies are also playing instruments and dancing. So always was a family institution. And slowly they've kind of come to be become very famous. And of course, there are different families across Rajasthan of Mangnyas who perform and are doing really well. Mehboob, of course, got associated with us about 5-6 years back, and we've given him a place to stay within the hotel, of course, to his whole family.
Fantastic. Yeah.
10-15 people, and they've been with us since then.
Fantastic. All these walking trails, there's another question. Kind request to share all your webinar on our email. I'll do that. All these walking trails are included in stay or add on as payable. This is from Kruti. Kruti Mehta is another great friend of Rare, and she again is a great big supporter. So she runs a travel company in Mumbai, and yeah, that's her question. The experience.
No, these are all add-on. These are all add-on and payable as per, you know, guest requirement once they're at the hotel. All the information, of course, is available on the website. So one can also choose to, you know, customize the stay as one wants to. So for example, if I want to come and, you know, not do the fort and do the Silk Route Trail, one can choose to do that.
So, yes. But also they can be done for an FIT as well as for a group. They can be done for 2 people as well as for yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So that was fantastic, Siddharth. I could talk to you forever, but as usual, time is short. On that note, but we will be talking. We'll be talking. I discovered a couple of lovely. Do you have any recommendations for books on the Silk Route that you would like to recommend to people?
Well, I think the recent one, the Silk Route that came out, I forget the author, which was about, I think, 3-4 years back. Fantastically done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yes. Peter, Frank Koppen. I got
Frank Koppen,
the Silk Route by Peter Frank Koppen.
We tweeted to him. We as a hotel had tweeted to him and told him that we do this trail, and he wrote back saying that I'm going to one day come and look at it as well. But I think that book
fantastic. I hope he does. It comes highly recommended by who's fantastic. His history is absolutely academic. And so on that note, Siddharth, I thank you for your time, and I hope to chat with you again on some. I'll find some other excuse to get you on a conversation like this. So stay tuned, folks. Yeah, fantastic. And please say hello to everybody. I know you guys are, are busy during the lockdown, and it's almost over, isn't it?
It's almost is. I think the flights resume now. So,
Yes. Yeah. So, like I said, Suryagad at 6 is on Instagram. You can follow their handle, and you would be able to see this beautiful music played out every day. Rare, we continue with our Destination Discovery series. We have 2 more today, which is basically live chats on Instagram on Rare India on the Rare India Instagram handle. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching, and thank you for always being the great support you've been. Stay home, stay safe, and see you soon.
thank you.
Thank you.